All right, welcome. I can see folks coming in, but I think in the interest of time and getting to our fantastic panelists, we will go ahead and get started. So welcome again. Thank you for joining us today for our public forum, Advancing Women's Participation in Clinical Trials, Barriers, Innovations, and Actionable Solutions. I'm Katie Schubert. I am President and CEO of the Society for Women's Health Research, and SWHR is a national nonprofit dedicated to advancing women's health through science, policy, and education while promoting research on sex differences to optimize women's health. And there's no better way to do that than to have a conversation on clinical trials and representation. And as we may know, today is Equal Research Day, which is the date marking June 10th, 1993, when the NIH Revitalization Act was passed and signed into law, and that required that women be included in clinical research at the NIH. Historically, though, women have been underrepresented in clinical trials, which has led to critical gaps in understanding in how diseases present, progress, and respond to treatment across the female lifespan. Biological factors such as hormonal changes and social and structural barriers like caregiving responsibilities, limited access to trial sites, and lack of awareness have contributed to lower participation. And as a result, treatments may be less optimized for women, particularly those from underrepresented backgrounds. Improving women's participation in clinical trials is essential to generating more accurate, inclusive evidence, advancing health equity, and ensuring that medical innovations are safe, effective, and responsive to the diverse needs of all women. And as part of our broader clinical trials program, we are highlighting why clinical trial participation cannot be treated as an afterthought. We're pleased to have our panelists joining us for today's public forum in recognition of Equal Research Day. Sabrina Mervyn Blake, Senior Project Manager, Clinical Trials Transformation Initiative, Mary McGowan, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research, and Charisse Van Loo, a Women Heart Champion. I also want to, of course, thank our sponsors for today's event, Organon and the Heart Disease Research Foundation. I would note that SWHR maintains independence and editorial control of our program development, content, and work products. And as we always do during our live webinars, we will be live tweeting during the event. We would invite you all to join us over there on X using the hashtag SWHR Talks Women's Health and SWHR Talks Heart on social media. And so with all of that, again, thank you for joining us. I'd like to turn it over to Serene Gulmamine, who is SWHR's Programs Manager, and she is moderating today's event. Serene.
Thank you, Katie. I just wanted to quickly touch on the history of clinical trials and what we've seen over the years. So, for much of the 20th century, women, especially pregnant and reproductive aged women, were systematically excluded from clinical research, creating gaps in the evidence base guiding their care. And so in 1977, the FDA had issued guidance effectively barring women of childbearing potential from early phase drug trials in response to a research tragedy related to thalidomide, a drug used to treat morning sickness. And although intended to protect infants from harm, this policy normalized women's exclusion from trials. And for many years, we had very little information about how medicines affect women differently, including how their bodies process medications, the right doses to use, possible side effects, and the long-term health outcomes. And so, as a result, many therapies were approved and prescribed without adequate understanding of how biological sex, hormonal status, pregnancy, or life stage might affect their effectiveness or safety. And this further contributed to adverse drug reactions and poor treatment for women. In terms of the timeline, you can kind of see here that in the 1990s, this marked a turning point in federal policy and advocacy. In 1990, the NIH established the Office of Research on Women's Health to elevate women's health research within the federal government. And that same year, SWHR was founded to champion the inclusion of women in biomedical research and to advocate for structural reform. The NIH Revitalization Act of 1993 mandated the inclusion of women and minorities in all NIH-funded clinical research and required analyses by sex, race, and ethnicity, strengthening the authority of ORWH and then and the then Office of Research on Minority Health, which later became the National Institute on Minority Health and Health Disparities. The FDA followed by creating its Office of Women's Health in 1994. And more recently, in the next slide, policy efforts have focused on moving beyond inclusion toward analysis and accountability. NIH's 2016 Sex as a Biological Variable policy requires investigators to consider sex in study design and reporting. In 2016, specific FDA guidance standardized the collection of race and ethnicity data in clinical studies and clinical trials and was later updated in 2024. A set of FDA guidance from 2020 and later updated in 2025 addressed eligibility criteria and trial design barriers to diversity. And FDA guidance issued in 2022 and 2024 introduced diversity action plans to improve enrollment of underrepresented populations in clinical trials, which include women. Despite these advances, meaningful inclusion remains uneven. Today's public forum will highlight perspectives from research, advocacy, and lived experience to explore the barriers limiting women's participation in clinical trials and highlight actionable strategies to improve inclusion, equity, and engagement across the research lifecycle. And so with that, I would like to welcome Sabrina Mervyn Blake to kick us off with a discussion on clinical trial operations, access, and engagement in women's health. Thanks for joining us, Sabrina.
Thank you so much, Serene. Let's have a moment to share my screen. Thank you all. I'm delighted to be here and to share today in this webinar. I am Sabrina Mervyn Blake, one of the senior project managers with CITI, Clinical Trials Transformation Initiative. CITI is a public-private partnership co-founded by Duke University and the FDA. And my presentation today, as we see here from the title, will focus on a critical goal, moving beyond simple awareness to actionable solutions for including more women in research. And I'll spend the next few minutes showing some evidence-based recommendations that support bridging this gap in women's health research. So our objectives for the session today include the role of public-private partnerships in advancing women's health research and trial participation, gaps in trial operations across the research lifecycle, and patient insight level realities that impact recruitment, participation, and retention of women and research participation. So first, just a little about CITI and who we are. CITI's mission is to develop and drive the adoption of practices that increase the quality and efficiency of trials. Our Transforming Trials 2030 vision imagines a system that is truly patient-centered and easily accessible. We achieve this through innovation and collaboration across the entire ecosystem, including more than 500 individuals and groups. At CITI, we facilitate collaboration by convening thought leaders across the clinical trials enterprise and develop evidence-based supported recommendations and tools to improve the quality and efficiency of clinical trials. You can find numerous sets of recommendations, tools, and case studies developed by our project teams that is representative, as we mentioned, across all therapeutic areas, well, not all partner groups such as sponsors, sites, patients, and beyond, all to help support the mission of CITI and drive innovation in clinical trials. To sort of set the context for today, we'll just sort of offer some background and sort of level setting. We know that we rely on clinical trials to advance medical knowledge and develop new medical products. And we also realize that the success of clinical trials depends on the ability to recruit, enroll, and retain participants. And we also know so well that successful representative enrollment and retention continues to be a challenge across clinical trials broadly. So again, I want to talk today about several CITI projects, and I won't talk about all of these on the list, but several of these on the list that have developed recommendations over time that will help bridge the gap in achieving a representation in clinical trials. One of the initial projects that I want to talk about is called a Collective Strategies to Enhance Proportionate Enrollment. To understand why women are underrepresented, we first look at the overall research life cycle. Currently, trial operations are often fragmented. We see a handoff chain where sponsors set recruitment plans, but these are often interpreted differently by CROs and then by sites. And then by the time a trial reaches a community, the patient experiences a sort of friction, if you would, of an uncoordinated system. So this particular project focuses on the operational handoffs, ensuring that communication, accountability, and clarity of roles are maintained from study design through implementation. In this particular project, we thought it was important to define what we mean by proportionate enrollment, and that proportionate enrollment is not just race and ethnicity, but a demographic composition that reflects the epidemiology of the disease or condition studied. So for this project, proportionate enrollment is defined broadly to include age, gender, ability, disability, geography, and beyond. We know, though, then when clinical trials are guided by disease epidemiology, we make our best efforts to ensure that the resulting medical products are safe and effective for everyone who will eventually use them, particularly women who may represent with different symptoms or responses to treatment. In terms of overall project methodology, this is an ongoing project right now. What we've done is conducted qualitative interviews in which we spoke with people from, again, across the enterprise, sponsors, CROs, sites and patients, vendors, to sort of explore the current bottlenecks and communication gaps in areas that requires transparency. Our next steps that we're currently in is analyzing then the interview data and taking a look at those initial findings and identifying new, hopefully, those areas that are sort of highlighted that we can then identify new solutions that are needed. The expected outcome then is a unified action plan with strategies to strengthen the ability to recruit and enroll participants. Another project from City that was done some time ago, and this is sort of, we can say, actionable solutions to strategic recruitment planning. This set of recommendations around improving patient recruitment in clinical trials set forth recommendations and tools that were developed with input from, again, another diverse set of team and stakeholders, including researchers, patient advocates, and representatives from academia, industry, and FDA. And what was found is that to truly make a difference, there needs to be a comprehensive solution that covers all areas of clinical research, from making sure the study is asking the right questions, questions that matter to patients and providers, to shaping study design and feasibility, to budget and implementation. So these tools released included a framework that outlines considerations for strategic recruitment planning throughout all stages of a clinical trial. The recommendations noted that greater efficiencies and success in diverse patient recruitment, women, minorities, and older adults may be realized by focusing on the earliest stages of protocol development. And on a practical level, that means moving recruitment planning upstream in the trial life cycle. It was also noted that we should also use real-world data to evaluate eligibility criteria, making sure there aren't unnecessary restrictive criteria for women. Another project back in 2023 was our improving diversity in clinical trials. This provided a comprehensive framework for shifting from reactive study-specific recruitment tactics to a long-term organizational commitment towards diversity and health equity. So in these 2023 diversity recommendations, they provide a roadmap across 4 pillars: commitment, partnership, resources, and accountability. Under a leadership commitment, it's noted that diversity must be an organizational priority and not just a one-off project. Under bidirectional partnership, it explains that we must build relationships with community groups before we need to recruit for a trial. Sustained investment helps us to understand that there needs to be dedicated personnel and funding that extends beyond the life of a single grant. And then lastly, under data-driven strategies, it explains that we must monitor recruitment in real time and adjust when we aren't meeting our goals. So these 8 core recommendations support organizations in moving from historical exclusion to creating a sustainable infrastructure for inclusive science. There's also an associated maturity model that serves as a roadmap for organizations to embed equitable access to participation into their foundational culture, ensuring trial results are truly representative of populations with a given disease. Next, in our final presentation or final project that I'll talk about is related to insurance-related financial toxicity. So beyond clinical trial logistics and operations, as we see in the image here, there is an iceberg of financial toxicity. Visible costs like unpaid time off are just the tip. There are also hidden burdens included in insurance inconsistencies, unclear billing for standard of care and delayed reimbursement processes. Insurance-related financial toxicity is an under-recognized barrier where system inefficiencies shift the financial risk directly to the participant, therefore disproportionately impacting socioeconomically disadvantaged women. So while we often discuss those visible costs of participation, like travel and time off, this project now helps to turn our attention to identify what has been seen as a significant and under-recognized barrier, and that is insurance-related financial toxicity. So this isn't just about whether a participant has insurance, it's about the administrative complexity and lack of transparency that exists even when policies like the Medicare National Coverage Determination are supposed to support the coverage of routine clinical care and trials. But currently, the system is plagued with fragmented responsibilities between sponsors, payers, and sites. And then when these partners have unclear handoffs or variant interpretations of coverage policies and decisions, the system effectively shifts the financial risk directly onto the participant. So for a woman considering a trial, that translates into a fear of denied claims or unexpected medical bills for what would be standard of care. And that is why City has launched this project, and I'm hoping through this project we will be able to map these insurance-related processes across the entire ecosystem. Our goal is to move beyond just identifying the problem to pinpointing exactly where these inefficiencies and financial risks arise. By clarifying how coverage decisions are made and where the administrative burden accumulates, we can develop actionable strategies to reduce patient-level financial harm and ensure that a woman's financial status or her insurance provider's administrative hurdles does not dictate her ability to contribute to medical research. And then I couldn't end this presentation without addressing issues related to trust and mistrust in clinical trials and even healthcare in general. These images are stark reminders of historical medical exploitation and racism that continue to influence how research is perceived today. There's one source that emphasized that the past is always the present, and researchers can't conduct work in isolation without knowing the local history of the communities that they serve. So demonstrating trustworthiness requires acknowledging past harms and realizing that building trust takes significant time and effort. So then to address these barriers, we need to have a paradigm shift from asking for trust to demonstrating trustworthiness. as we only receive trust when we have been deemed trustworthy. This means moving away from the blaming the community for low participation, and instead sharing power with those closest to the injustice. So as researchers, we must show our work through transparency, and that's related to funding and outcomes and limitations. And the AAMC has developed a set of principles of trustworthiness. And one of those principles is the community is already educated, and that's why it doesn't trust us. So it is certainly important for us to make that shift and making sure that we are including those voices as necessary during trial design. So then in conclusion, advancing women's health requires unified action. And public-private partnerships like City play a vital role by convening stakeholders to create consensus-driven, actionable solutions. And when we design trials that are patient-centered, financially neutral, and trustworthy, we can achieve a significant return on investment, which is better science, better treatments, and improved patient trust. And I'll just note that all the recommendations and tools that I have discussed here can be found on the City website for your reference. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sabrina, for sharing your expertise. Next, we will have Mary McGowan, who will discuss how patient advocacy, data, coalition building, policy change, and community engagement can help break down barriers to clinical trial participation.
Great. Thank you, Serene, very much. Hello, everybody. I'm just getting my slides up. There we go. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in to today's webinar. I just want to start out by really thanking Katie for your extraordinary leadership and your very dynamic team for the work that you all are doing to advance women's health. So very important, and thank you for the opportunity for being here today and presenting on this webinar. So I'm going to be talking about a national campaign that the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research launched called Ignore No More. And the whole purpose of this campaign was really to break down barriers to advanced clinical trials and research in America. So for those who may not know about FSR, we are the leading international organization dedicated to finding a cure for sarcoidosis and along the way supporting sarcoidosis patients. We do this through accelerating research. We do a lot of clinician education and engagement, offer CME. We have a number of different patient support programs. We educate through webinars, town halls, podcasts, and infographics, and advocate. We are headquartered in Chicago, but we have a DC office due to the advocacy work that we're doing on Capitol Hill. So for those who may not know what sarcoidosis is, it is an inflammatory disease. So inflammatory cells grow into clumps called granulomas. These granulomas can form in any organ in the body. And many patients who have sarcoidosis have multi-organ involvement. The cause is unknown, but we do believe it's due to genetically predisposition as well as environmental exposures that trigger sarcoidosis in the body. We all know how critically important patient stories are and how they can really change the understanding for researchers and for others about the lived experience. This campaign, I hope, is going to highlight how bringing together over 400 patient stories and lived experiences can really change the trajectory for medical research for the entire nation. So when we look at sarcoidosis, unfortunately, it is a disease of disparities, and Black women by far have the highest prevalence and the worst outcomes. So we see that they are 3 times more likely to have sarcoidosis than white men and women. that they are 18 times more likely to be hospitalized, and that they are 12 times more likely to die of sarcoidosis compared to white men and women. They also experience much more severe pulmonary and extrapulmonary disease, organ involvement, and really significant steroid-related complications, and they are medicated with high levels of steroids for much longer periods of times. So these are really staggering statistics for the Black women community. So this campaign was really based on data, including the highest prevalence, highest mortality, and also when we look at the Black representation in America in clinical trials, it's 16%, and for a rare disease like sarcoidosis, it's even much lower than that. So we really wanted to do something about this. So this Ignore No More campaign started as an educational campaign focused at the Black community and clinicians. Phase 2 of the campaign was focused on advancing clinical trials. And phase 3 is a roadmap for progress. So the first phase, Ignore No More, was a social media awareness campaign. We had an educational infographic. You see it there on the left-hand side. We worked extensively with the Black community and did a lot of education during this 5-month national campaign. We were thrilled to have reached over 500,000 media impressions in just a short period of time. There was tremendous interest in this by the Black media. We also were thrilled. This is the phone call that every CEO hopes for when a celebrity, Gerald Prescott Galion, called me and said, Mary, I found out about this Ignore No More campaign. I have sarcoidosis. I've never gone public with it, but I believe so strongly in what you're doing. I would like to be the national spokesperson, celebrity spokesperson on this campaign. I won't charge you anything, and I will help you amplify your message. So ever since, we've been working very closely with Cheryl, but as what we do at FSR on an ongoing basis, we keep the patient at the center of our work. So we also created a Women of Color Advisory Committee. We also had a clinician advisory committee. Everybody received communications training and spoke to and was interviewed by many of the media partners that I showed on the previous slide. Very successful 5-month campaign. We then launched into Act Now. We added African Americans, men, to the campaign, as this campaign was focused more broadly on the Black community. So the Act Now campaign stands for Advanced Clinical Trials for Equity. Again, we had an educational infographic. You see it there on the left-hand side. We had the Patient and Clinical Advisory Committee, as I mentioned, but we also put together a national IRB-approved survey. It was a 55-question questionnaire. We put it out in a national press release asking the entire Black community living with sarcoidosis to please take time to complete this survey, answering questions with their experience or barriers to enrolling in clinical trials. So we had very robust response. Our goal was to have 200. We actually had 406 completed surveys. With that robust data, we put together a key opinion leadership meeting, bringing together clinicians and researchers to take a deep dive into the data and to come up with recommendations. We then put together a patient focus group to review those recommendations and come up with their own recommendations. We took all of this data, we wrote a 60-page white paper. If anybody's interested, it is on our website at stopsarcoidosis.org. We launched the white paper at a standing room only congressional briefing, highlighting all of the data. And it was at that briefing that I stated that the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research wanted to change the Family Medical Leave Act in America because employees were not, their job was not covered if they were taking time off to enroll in clinical trials. We also stated at that briefing that we wanted a 5,000 tax credit for any individual who enrolled in a clinical trial. So when we look at what the survey showed us, we look at the barriers. The number one barrier was that they are never being asked to enroll in a clinical trial. They're not having the discussion with their clinicians. Trust, also too expensive, lack of job flexibility, there it is, and need for more education and information. Motivating factors were clear information on benefits of the trials, financial incentives, and hearing from other patient participants from their own community. It's interesting to note that of the folks who were identified here, 86% of the respondents identified as women, and 11 of the 12 focus group participants identified as women. So women really driving the majority of this campaign and this information associated with clinical trials. So what we did after that was I called a lawyer and I said we wanted to change the FMLA. And we had very smart lawyers. And the lawyer said, look, Mary, that will take years and you may never win. So what we're going to do, we're going to go to the Department of Labor and we're going to ask for clarification. So we wrote a letter to the Department of Labor asking for clarification about individuals who enroll in clinical trials. Are their jobs covered as well as caregivers? We were not getting a response. We put together this coalition that has 44 members now. We did 40 Congressional Hill visits, really bringing this to the forefront. And lo and behold, we received a 6-page letter. If anybody's interested, it's on our website. 6-page letter from the Department of Labor stating now that anybody in America who enrolls in a clinical trial who is eligible for FMLA, their job is protected, as is a family member caregiver. Their job is also protected. So this being the number 3 highest barrier for those to enroll in clinical trials, no doubt is going to have an extraordinary positive outcome for all of medical research, not just for sarcoidosis, but for all chronic diseases. So you see the coalition members here. And by the way, if anybody on the call is interested in joining this dynamic coalition, we are continuing this very important work, breaking down other barriers as you see identified in the work groups here on the slide. So what does that really mean with the FMLA? Well, this means now that 60 million Americans are now eligible for their job to be protected. And what that also covers is their job assignments, promotions, training opportunities, health insurance. None of these things can be taken from employees anymore. And so this is just a great outcome, and we're trying to get the word out about this FMLA victory. It's also interesting to note here that currently there are 63 million Americans, family caregivers who are caring for an adult or child with a medical condition. 70% of working age caregivers are in the workforce, and 4 million are caring for children under 18 with an illness or disability. And here it is, 3 in 5 caregivers are women. We also see the stories from the doctors that are coming in now. We have many individuals who are currently in trials and have gone to their doctor saying, I need to stop the trial because I'm afraid I'm going to be losing my job. I'm getting pressure for taking too much time off. This was a story in Stat News of a clinician who was able to say to the patient, no, you won't be losing your job. You are now covered under FMLA. I will fill out a form. And the individual was able to continue being in that really important trial. And so these are the stories that we are collecting so that patients don't have to decide, do I need to quit the trial? Do I need to quit my job? Do I continue to juggle despite the employer warnings? And now they have coverage under FMLA. We took it to a next step recently. We launched what is called Champions for Change. This is a campaign we are asking literally every organization and every company in America to provide at least one paid day off for those employees who enroll in clinical trials. So excited. We already have 18 employers who are now part of this. And now 60,000, actually, this is outdated. Last week, we got a new company to join. It's now 100,000 employees are now eligible to be paid for taking time off for clinical trials. And you see the companies represented there. So for those who would like to get involved with us again, please consider becoming a coalition member. We're continuing to break down the other barriers that were identified. We're continuing to get the word out on the FMLA promotion and the Champions for Change partnership. So there's lots of opportunities here to engage in that. And there are some QR codes to download the Champion Flyer and to download the coalition flyer, and the information is also on our website. So I want to thank you very much for your attention and greatly appreciate your interest in this topic. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary. Please note that those who are tuned in live can submit questions at any time using the Q&A function, and we will try to address as many as we can during the panel discussion portion of the program. And so now I want to introduce Charisse Van Loo, who will share her patient story and clinical trial experience.
Great, thank you. Okay, share my screen. So yes, my name is Charisse Van Loo. I turned 45 years old this weekend. And I experienced STEMI a few years ago, unexpectedly, and I didn't know that heart disease was an issue in my family, and it was. And I happened to be in a clinical trial that I'm told likely made it so that I survived my heart event. I started a clinical trial at the age of 39. And it took years to get treatment, to get a diagnosis. I spent at least 4 years trying to get a diagnosis, going to top hospitals up and down the East Coast, taking so much time off work. Finally, my Cushing syndrome progressed enough that I started having better, quote unquote, clearer indicators, so that I was able to get a diagnosis. And then I was referred to a clinical trial because I wasn't eligible for surgery. So medication was my only option. And the existing medication was not something that I was willing to try because they're pretty horrendous side effects at the time. So I had to take 3 days off of work to qualify for this clinical trial, just because I had to go twice, and it was basically a day and a half with travel, because my labs didn't qualify the first time. They said that's normal, unfortunately. Please try again, which I'm glad they did encourage me to try again, but that was more time off work. Um, and At the time, I had full-time employment and short-term disability insurance and benefits that allowed me to participate in the trial. It was extensive paperwork. Uh, I would have never known about it if I didn't already know about it, type of thing. Um, HR was not helpful. Um, there were a lot of hurdles to just being able to get a few days off. I had obviously been dealing with a chronic condition and didn't have a lot of extra time um, at my disposal. Um, and taking unpaid time off wasn't much of an option. But I had a lot of privileges in this scenario, and even with all of those, it was still a challenge. So, just imagining the experience of a patient with um, a job without benefits, and less flexibility to take time off, just really difficult. Uh, the cost was also an issue. The it wasn't supposed to be, but bureaucracies happen, and in my case, I had a few years of travel and accommodation expenses that accumulated before they were able to start processing them. Um, and the sponsor eventually resolved the situation, but you know those costs, those expenses were just on my credit cards, right? And so having access to credit, having access to that option, and being able to say like, yes, I can do this, have this $5,000 of expenses and carry the interest until I can get reimbursed, and however long is another extreme privilege, right? And it just if I had dropped out of the trial at that time before I got into the extended clinical trial and got on the real medication, um, they can't tell me the likelihood, but I'm myself comfortable saying that if I had dropped out of the trial before I got onto the real medication in the extended clinical trial, I probably would have not survived the Widowmaker heart attack that I had. And if I had, I would have been severely disabled. Instead, I came through with zero heart damage, right? So this clinical trial was staying in this trial potentially saved my life. Um, Definitely worth the $5,000, right? But had to have access to that credit in the first place. Um, Following my heart attack in 2024, I learned that there was a correlation between increased cardiovascular events and Cushing's. No one had bothered to point that out. Really, which is something that, in my experience in the clinical trial, um, I don't know if this is a common patient experience, but there wasn't there wasn't much focus on educating me, um, which I did not appreciate. Um, Very interesting, like what the comorbidities are and things. Um, but I did learn, and why I'm here now as a women heart champion, that heart disease is the leading cause of death in women, and how significant it is when you have a family history of it. I happen to be estranged from the person that had heart disease in my family. So it didn't occur to me, like I didn't really think of that person's medical history as my medical history, especially because they're different gender. So um, that oversight and not providing that information to my medical providers, really, really hurt me. But I didn't have this context of knowing how important that information was. Some of the takeaways from my clinical trial experience, I'm still in the clinical trial. Medication is not FDA approved yet. So, I continue to take time and have expenses that for the most part do get reimbursed, which I'm very lucky. But I need to do that in order to get the medication that really allows me to function. Um, the obstacles to women are just pretty excessive, in my opinion, for clinical trials. Um, I was a woman in a metropolitan area in a city with a good job, good benefits, and it was still extremely difficult. Um, if I didn't have caretaking responsibilities or significantly low income or lack of access to credit, and so any of those factors and more, if you add on a slow reimbursement process, if there are costs involved, can really uh, pose hurdles that we can hopefully find a way to work on eliminating, um, so that there's more equitable access. And just want to share a little bit more about Women Heart. For anyone who may be not familiar, feel free to check out the website and the community. I'm happy to connect with any folks separately if you're interested. But it's a great community, raising awareness, educating, and doing advocacy to support women at risk or living with heart disease. And folks like myself go out and try to answer questions, build relationships, and build trust so that women are more comfortable, women and their allies and supporters are more comfortable seeking support um, for their health conditions, whatever they may be. And I really appreciate being invited here.
Thank you so much, Cherise, for sharing your lived experience. And I think it is really important and key to showcase that clinical trial participation is not just an abstract concept. So thank you. I'm going to invite the other panelists to come on camera so that we can have a short Q&A session. And while they're doing that, I would just like to remind everyone that our conversation today is intended for educational purposes, and it's not intended or implied to serve as a substitute for personal medical or professional advice. And we encourage all patients and consumers to confirm information and consult their healthcare providers to determine their individual needs. So I'll open the conversation with to the three of you to ask, when we talk about advancing women's participation in clinical trials, what is the first barrier that comes to mind for you all as a priority that we would need to do to stop treating it as a patient's responsibility and start treating it as a systems design issue? So whoever would like to take that first.
I'm happy to go first. I that's a challenging question to say just one, because things are complex, right? There's several things that come into play, that many barriers that has long been written in literature and included. I'll just say from an operational perspective, as I mentioned in the presentation, also heard here, is to your point, trial design is really important, and getting feedback early on during trial design is important. Then you look at Mary's presentation and all the upfront work to make sure that the flyers and posters are representative and people can see themselves, really, really important. And we need to bring that type of energy up front in the trial design process so that we're not trying to play catch up when it comes time to recruit, but that we've given really thoughtful energy and thinking early on, specifically for women's health research.
Absolutely. Mary?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I also, we just need to do a better job of supporting patients. I mean, it's challenging. These are, sick patients typically enrolling in clinical trials. They're working, many of them financially, maybe burdened for rare disease and even other chronic diseases. You look at those living in rural America. We have people who are on airplanes to participate in clinical trials back and forth. And so we need to, I think, as a nation, have better support and better systems to support the patients who are willing to give of themselves for the future of the health of the country. And I also firmly believe, and you heard it in the presentation, corporate America really needs to get involved in this way more than they currently are. And it's great to see some progress here. But if people are working for companies, companies' greatest asset are their people. If you don't have healthy people, you don't have a healthy company. And if we don't have healthy companies, we don't have a healthy nation. So corporate America, it's in their best interest to get intimately involved in supporting their employees in any way that they can.
Absolutely. Sharice, I don't know if you want to answer the question, but I have another question for you if you'd prefer that.
Sure, happy to go to the next question.
Sure. So kind of thinking about your own clinical trial experience, what made participation feel possible for you and what could have made it easier or more transparent? I know you kind of touch on a little bit of the privilege, right, of being able to take the credit and whatnot, but in terms of maybe things that would have made it easier, what things come to mind?
Sure. I I think well, it's hard to know what my providers were thinking, but from my perspective, I don't think they understood that I didn't have a full understanding of how serious the situation was, right?
Mhm.
Um, and it's because yeah, and for whatever reason, right? And I think that happens with a lot of chronic conditions. But if I had been given more statistics, like, women with Cushing syndrome are X times as likely to die from a cardiovascular event, like anything, like it would have illuminated to me, like,
Yeah.
not doing this clinical trial isn't really an option. The only thing that I saw was like just life continuing on as usual, which was pretty unbearable, but I didn't think it would kill me, right? But it actually was killing me. They just weren't very explicit about it. So I think maybe I should have asked better questions. Um, but especially if you've had years and years where you've been trying to get treatment and you're exhausted and you're just lucky to like drag yourself into like the 12th doctor's office, um, having coherent conversations is not one of the things you're great at. So I did what I could with the energy I had at the time, but I think when when someone has potential for a clinical trial and it really is, especially, I, one of their best options, really communicating that better, um, could go a long way, in my opinion.
Yeah, it sounds like what I'm hearing is education, awareness, and kind of more guidance within the clinician office as it relates to kind of the conditions that might be impacting, and then how that might relate back to clinical trials if if they're available and whatnot. So I hear you. We have heard that sentiment many a time from patients. I want to ask, because we're coming up on time, one last question that kind of I would like the perspective of each of you. We have a diverse audience, so that spans patients, healthcare providers, as well as researchers, industry, policy professionals. And if you had one takeaway that you would like each of, the audience members to leave with, what that might be.
I can start with that. I would say, continue to listen to the patients and gather data that you can for the purpose of being able to make change. There's just extreme power in that to think again about this small national campaign, 5 months, that we were able to gather the experiences and the sense of 400 patients and to bring that to Capitol Hill and to the Department of Labor. There is extreme power in the voice of the patients if we do a good job of collecting and reporting out on the data that can really result in national change. So I would encourage everybody to really think about ways of gathering that data and be able to be very reflective on how can that data be used to really drive change that is going to help our healthcare system.
Yeah, and my mind always goes back to the patient as well, even as we think about city and as conveners of experts across the enterprise at all levels. And we're always doing, sort of the cutting edge innovative thinking, which we need. But we are just remembering that all of that, behind all of that, is still the patient. And if the patient is not at the center, or we realize is either at the beginning and at the end of that whole process, then we sort of miss what we're doing it all for. So I agree about keeping the patient centered in all of the work.
And Sharice, any last words you'd like to share?
Just that I appreciate everyone on the panel and everyone participating for all your efforts to advance women's health and especially through clinical trials. It's really heartening and creates a lot of hope. And thanks for all that you do.
Thank you all so much for your expertise and your time. We truly could not have had this conversation without you all, particularly because of your involvement within the clinical trial space and in your disease areas and conditions. And I want to be sure to also thank our sponsor, Organon and Heart Disease Research Foundation, for their support of this public forum and SWHR's clinical trials program. SWHR will continue this conversation online and across our work to improve women's representation in clinical trials. And you can visit our website to access free resources, including policy agendas, fact sheets, toolkits, and webinars. And in addition to our website, you can also connect with us on social media to register for future events, download women's health resources, and to sign up for our newsletter. We will send out an email with a recording of today's webinar to all registrants, as well as post the recording on the event's webpage for future viewing. So please be on the lookout for that and feel free to share with others as we continue the conversation with hashtag SWHR Talks Women's Health and hashtag SWHR Talks Heart. Thank you for joining us.